Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to this talk. I'm really excited to be speaking here because I love St. Louis. I used to live around here, spend most of my formative years living around St. Louis, and so just coming here feels like coming home. My name is Chris Weber. I work at ICF Olson. We're a development shop. The Olson side is the design shops. The ICF is the multinational company part. So we're still feeling it out. We've been doing a lot of great work. I'm not going to go on about the sites we've made. I'm excited to be talking here because I get to talk about web components. I've been excited about web components for a very long time. Tim might have been there. 2013 was the first time I gave this talk. I don't think anybody knew exactly what I was going to be talking about. But hopefully they went away with some interesting things. It's a lot more relevant now. I just wanted to say that this is going to be a talk about the web components standard. So if you're looking for a talk about building components in Drupal, there's an excellent talk going on right now about bricks and paragraphs, and wouldn't be offended if you got up and left for that one. I hear it's going to be great. But I'm also going to be talking about paragraphs and Drupal and about how we can work together in Drupal with the concept of web components, kind of, sort of. I'm mainly going to be talking about the emerging standard called web components and why I'm excited about it, what you can do to ramp up your knowledge about it, and why I think it's going to be a hugely valuable thing for the years to come. But first, let me get to know about you. Could you raise your hand and keep it raised if you write themes for Drupal? Okay. If you plan out content types or structures, paragraphs, blocks, if you've ever used jQuery UI or Bootstrap before, some kind of component framework, other component framework, okay, that's mostly everybody. I thought it would be a pretty large number because in my own development for the last couple of years, these things have been unavoidable. Even if you're a back-end developer, you're asked pretty regularly to come in and assist in the theming. So this is the roadmap for today. We're going to be talking about the componentized age, the age that I believe we are currently in, some survival skills on how to make your way through the next couple of years working with components, and what's next after that. Let's see if there's any notes. Good. So what's not obvious about the title of this talk is where I got the title from. One of my favorite books is Neil Stephenson's The Dimond Age. And what struck out for me from that book was their explanations of what programming was like in this world. There were polymer engineers that they could make incredible things that were intricately detailed, very complex things, but the process was kind of like writing apps for a Star Trek replicator. Kind of. The result of the process would be immensely complex, but the process was very simple to do. You would just take these simple components and you would figure out how they would fit together. They even went into detail about how the development tools had this haptic feedback response. So you would take these components and you would try to fit them together, and they would vibrate if there were bugs in what you were trying to do. The expertise was gained in knowing how each of the components fit together and the different techniques you could use in order to figure out if they actually do fit together. So yeah, the trick with polymer engineering was knowing how things fit together. And if you think about engineering in general, that's a large amount of the task. This idea of making something sophisticated from combining smaller components is found in all forms of engineering. Reusing tools and solutions that have been proven to be effective just makes common sense. You wouldn't want to build a bridge with a material that hasn't passed 17,000 tests and performance checks. You don't just start building buildings without knowing if the components are going to hold up. In the past, there have been a lot of companies who have applied this concept of combining components to make web pages to various success. In early times, there were a lot of companies who tried to pitch their component system as the panacea for all web development. Rapid application development became a buzz term for providing a set of components that would make making pages, making websites easy. Whole platforms like Drupal came in and provided a comprehensive tool set for making websites. Their APIs would be open and available for you to learn. The cost in dollars for buying into the system would be as low as possible, compensated with the cost of that you would need to invest into learning and how to use the system effectively. And these days, development for mobile applications like Android provide a deeply integrated set of visual components that only really work with their libraries, but provides you a great amount of capability for managing the user interfaces that are going to be rendered on mobile devices. And newer frameworks like Angular and React provide their own sets of tools and ways of interacting with the library in order to implement languages. I tend to like the Angular and React situation and Drupal well because the tools are available freely, and if you wanted to make changes to the system, there's a process for that. You can get involved in the community and make those changes. If you wanted to make a change in ASP.NET, then historically has not been a very clear avenue for getting that done, other than being somebody with lots of money that you would pay Microsoft to do what you want. So all these frameworks and these systems and libraries can lock you in and make it difficult for you to remove that system as a dependency. Like I said in the past, with Cold Fusion and old school Microsoft technologies like ASP or even ASP.NET, that was the goal. To keep you coming back at each iteration and pay more for the joy of continuing to use their framework. Keep sending them checks. And even though Drupal does not have the sales motive to keep you locked in, and it still kind of is difficult to take the components that we make with paragraphs and bricks and just simply reuse that in some other kind of PHP framework. So the problem really is unavoidable. You learn a language, you build a thing with that language. If you want to use that thing in some other language, you're going to need to translate. But what if the language that you wrote it in was the language that everyone shares? What if we found Latin of the web? Every web developer will eventually need to know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript because everything renders to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That is the language that web browsers know. What if we were able to build the same kind of way of bundling up knowledge and functionality that were based upon these technologies? What if we could extend the web framework to be as capable as we need it to be in order to do all the things we wanted it to do? That was the basic, that is eventually became the problem that web components wanted to solve. The original problem that web components wanted to solve was that they kept on making these front-end components for different web products. And when I say they, I mean specifically Google engineers. I don't know exactly what it was. Maybe it was like the Santa Tracker or something like that. But they kept on they were wanting to make these front-end components, but they kept on having like junior developers come in, other developers coming in, doing something somewhere else in the site, and broke everything that was going on in the component. Nothing was wrong with the component, but the behaviors and the styles going on in the rest of the page kept on bleeding in and breaking things. So they originally wanted to solve that. Tangent, sorry, I'm prone to do that. Since the early 2010s, browser vendors have been trying to build that capability into web browsers. Web standards is based, web components are based upon 4 different standards. Templates, Shadow DOM, custom elements, and some kind of bundling system. They originally thought it was going to be HTML imports. Other browser vendors don't actually want to implement HTML imports. So recently, they rewrote everything to work with JavaScript ES6 modules, which was a part of the JavaScript standard and is perfectly capable of delivering the different bundles of components. So a little bit about what each does. Templates allows you to define an inert JavaScript-based template that you can reuse, make additional stubs of, as many as you want, very, very efficiently. The custom element standard is a way to define a custom element, which is really just a bundle of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And the Shadow DOM standard provided that barrier between what was going on in the rest of the page and what is going on in your element. It provided that way to make sure that the behaviors and styles of your page do not bleed in to your component. So what you also see on the board is the current level standard support. Chrome and Opera, because they both share the Blink code base, they support web standards fully. Safari also supports web standards fully. Mozilla and IE both have on their bug trackers, and they're slowly working towards 100% native compliance with all of the standards. But we don't need them to be fully compliant right now, because there's a set of web components polyfills that allows every evergreen browser to be able to support all of the standards necessary in order to blaze a trail. So, we are in the componentized age. What did I say here? What are some examples of how people are using web components today? What are the kind of components that we can make? And I'll get into a couple live demos. So this is going to be a nerve-wracking talk for everyone, mainly me, as we hope the demo gods don't screw this up. So one prominent website that uses web components quite a bit is EA.com. They had, every year there's a Polymer Summit where developers who are working on web components gather. They had an excellent talk about exactly how they built this out, all the benefits they're gaining from this. But the main benefit that EA is getting is that they make a lot of temporary websites, not so temporary websites. They make a lot of games. And each game really needs their own marketing message. So they make a lot of websites, and they need a way to rapidly make those websites while at the same time keeping in control of the quality of the sites by being in control of each part of the website. So I think this is where I thought it was going to be on my screen, so I can click on one of these. And I didn't expect to do this, but here's EA.com. And if you look into, get down. You start seeing weird tags like this. A common artifact of web components is that when you define a custom element, its format needs to be Word-Word. That allows you to namespace your custom element so that you can, in EA's case, they wanted to say, this is the version of this component that's going to be on EA.com. And if you look if you expand the custom element with something like Chrome, you're able to expand what is called the shadow root. Remember, we talked about shadow down. Creates that barrier between the element, what's happening inside the element, and what's happening outside the element. Shadow root shows you what is going on inside the element. So what they decided to do was to provide their own style tag and a couple of templates. The current artifact of what's going on in browsers these days is that the whole idea is that you would stub out the element and you would never actually be able to see what's going on in the element. If you were able to view this page, not with Chrome development tools, but with like a standard view source, you wouldn't ever see what is going on inside the element. The point is to not care. And I'll get to more about that later. But as you can see here, we have a EA section column inside a EA section, and an EA section subheading. The second site that I wanted to show you, if I can get back to the presentation, is another site that they did, easports.com. Actually, let's not look at EA Sports. I haven't vetted that one. Let's look at this one. Battlefield. So if you look at Battlefield, you look at its source, you start seeing tags like this. The BF hero. I would bet you dollars to donuts that there exists on one of the other EA sites, some kind of EA-hero or whatever other game-hero. And that is because custom elements are extendable and inheritable. You can define the base functionality of an element and then extend that base functionality with some other kind of element. So, what are the benefits of web components? I wish I wrote the speaker notes for this slide. I'm not showing the slide because I'm fooling around. Here we go. You can create a component that finally you can guarantee that when you make your meticulously written JavaScript, it's not going to be broken by whatever else is going on in the site. Your styles that you have in your component aren't going to bleed out into the rest of the page if you messed up the scoping of your selector. You don't have to worry about some other kind of joker getting onto your project and creating some bad CSS that blows up your components. And I don't know if I wrote this. Yes, you can inherit and extend elements, but now that I think of it, one of the more exciting things about a component is that you can write your own set of tests that prove and verify that your component is ready to be used by others. Just like if you were a civil engineer, you wanted to make sure that your bolts met a specific metal density and strength and heat and so many, like 17,000 different ways you would measure a simple nail in order to make sure that it met industrial specifications. Your components can start becoming that specific. But also because I'm a back-end developer and I love APIs, you can think of your components, and we'll show this when we get into the live demos. And I'm writing code. We'll write an element together right here. When you're creating an element, I'm not going to go back to EA, but I would show you this at EA. You can define your own attributes on your custom element. And those attributes can start behaving and working for you as if they were your own API. So you want to create a simple presentational element to control different parts of it. You can control that in the attributes, or you can control that various ways. Okay. So in case you find these slides later, and I'll post them later, here's a couple of other links to follow. And there's the YouTube video of the lead developer for the EA project talking about how they implemented everything. What just happened? Let's get into the different kinds of elements. I like to break elements into 3 basic categories: presentational, layout, and data-driven. It really is no purpose for breaking out data-driven into its own category other than I think it's special. So the kind of elements that people have been able to make so far are elements like the page stepper. If you ever needed the ability to create a visual representation of a workflow, to say these are the things that need to happen in step 1 and step 2 and beyond, you could just drop in a specific page stepper, paper stepper element into your already existing paragraph or custom code and simply just figure out how to work with the attributes the right way in order to get it to work for you. There are ways where you can define like which step is editable. If I were to jump to, I can't. Okay, fine, step 1. Demo guides, okay. Okay, demo guides. I'm tempting them. Back. There is the ability to have a time format. Oh, this hurts so bad. My favorite one of this is this middle one here, where it's able to show you a very visual and active representation of the time you visited the page, and it will automatically update. That's a behavior that's written in JavaScript that is able to update the element over time. So you get it, right? You can make presentational elements. There are layout elements, like a very company that's doing a lot of these type of components are Bobbin. So if you wanted to create like a grid and not have to mess with Bootstrap classes, or if you don't want to figure out the right math, or if you just, this is like your 17th time you've made a grid and you don't want to do it again, you can drop in the split layout element, and then you'd be able to get to go. What did I just do? And there are data-driven elements, like the Vaadin grid. How many times, has anyone else done like ASP.NET programming? How many times did they say what they wanted a data grid, right? Data grid, oh my goodness. So yeah, you can do data grids and take out the one thing they sold a lot of companies on, like, and you can do data-driven drop-downs as sophisticated as those. Okay, so I guess if everything up until now was tempting the demo gods, this is their opportunity to wreak havoc. I've got 2 demos ready to go. I'm going to show of hands who wants to make an element from scratch and who wants to see one that's data-driven. From scratch. Data-driven. Both? Why not? All right, it's code time. That's the wrong one. So, come on over here. Make it, wait, this is the one where I have everything figured out. Show me the one that I need to start from scratch. Here we go. There we go. Okay. This is going to be weird. So I'm going to have to do one of these things. All right. So, first step, we need a terminal. There's a client library that makes this easy for you. It's called Polymer. And it just has a few set of commands, but one of them is to init and to basically initialize your component. So we'll do that. By default, it takes the name of the folder. We'll do a element, call it, whoops, stop that. Stop it. Said, what are you doing? Why? No! All right, setup complete. We got a number of things. Let's put a dot, get ignore in there, just because. All right, so we've got our folder structure here. By default, Polymer these days are using Bower. This is based on Polymer 2. I don't know if anybody is a fan of JavaScript libraries or a fan of Node specifically, but they are in the process of switching everything to using NPM. I don't know if anyone cares about that, but just for the record, for the recording, they're switching to NPM. So, but the installing with Bower brought in all these libraries that we're going to need. And by default now, we can actually see what this looks like by just using the defaults. Using Polymer serve. And then we can go to this URL. Get off my screen. No. Go away. Okay, fine. There you are. Why did you go all the way over there? Where are you? There we go. That's what it looks like. Hello. The next step is to figure out what we want this element to look like. And I thought that it would be nice if we can go to the St. Louis Drupal website and do this little thing here. Make that into a component. So we need the markup for it. Let's figure out what that is. And it looks like this. You just copy that whole thing. Ow. Oh, it's going to kill my neck. All right. So this is where the element is defined, and right now it's pretty boring. So let's just replace that whole thing with the markup for the element. So the idea is that we want to take over specific parts of the element, and instead of having them be static markup like this, we'll plug in variables, we'll plug in text for those things. So it looks like what we have here is an image. But if it's an image, and if it's a proper image, it probably has an image source. And then it'll have an image alt. How am I doing on time, Tim? All right, whatever. 15 minutes. 15 minutes? Yeah. All right, let's speed it. Yeah, I should have done this by default. Okay. So here's the code where I've got everything figured out. And I can jump to specific points in time. So this is where I'm headed. Let's not do that. Let's just see what the difference is. Let's jump straight to the end. This is what the element would be. I did revert. Oh, okay. Looking at it. I've teased the demo gods too much, it looks like. This is what it's supposed to look like here. So, in order to find a place where you're going to use a variable, use the double square bracket in order to declare where an image source is going to be. And this is where I wanted to take over the header and the content. So, if everything else is right. And then over here in the demo folder, there's a file that basically sets up a demo that we're going to see. And I've got two different places. One place where the element is used without any attributes, and one where I'm changing some attributes. So over here in terminal, we'll see if my plans all destroyed. Should be seeing two. Oh, it's not called that anymore. This is where the element is registered. Wait a minute, is demo. Screw anything else up? I did not. You're lying. There it is. So as you can see, the only things I took over were, oh, I guess you can't see, were the image and the header, but that the element, because I was able to tell it to inherit and put all this CSS in line, that it was able to render this markup in the shadow DOM as a custom element. Demo 2, for you still have stamina for this. This is a project that I set up using Reservoir in order to serve data based upon the content that was inside a Drupal site. And here is where I defined a custom element. It's possible to be data driven, but you simply just need to know what objects you need to reference within the API. And the object that basically has all the data is this object called Ajax response. The idea here is that because I haven't changed this demo at all, it'll just work. I'm in WebStorm now. No, thank you. Here we go.
for this little kit.
Data-driven. So, thank you for that. I geek out about stuff like that. So we've talked about the componentized age. We've showed a few ways of creating components. And now I'd like to finish by talking about why I'm excited about web components. Web components is an idea that can work with any existing framework in order to improve the engineering practice, in my view, of creating these standalone components that can be reused in multiple places. But I feel that Drupal particularly can benefit from web components by taking the front end that a lot of people have said has grown much slower than other platforms that are bringing out brand new stuff and new interesting things, and separating the development of working on those front-end components, reusable front-end components, while at the same time being able to follow the idea of getting off your island and using components that other people are making in different and interesting ways. There are two current modules or development efforts in Drupal, one being the settings tray. It's going to be a really interesting thing in the next version of Drupal 8.4. While they were developing that, they wanted a way to make sure that, again, none of the styles that are happening added by themers would come in and break the settings tray. And it seems like web components would be a very great and complete solution for that in order to protect the settings tray in the future. There's also in the Drupal 7 era, there was a module that I used to like called Style Guide that was able to read all the different components within your system, perhaps just the default ones, but you could extend it to show even more, and show basically how they look like all on one page. Currently, in the Drupal 8 era, there are a couple of projects that are trying to do the same thing. There is the components module that is trying to work with folks that do a lot of work with pattern labs and other kinds of libraries that have a very concrete way of registering those components. And I'm currently trying to work on a patch in order to make that work with web components. There is also the web components module. It exists. It's mainly for Drupal 7 right now. I'm trying to port it to Drupal 8. The same people who make the web components module do a lot of work for Penn State. They're currently working on an educational learning management system that is based upon Drupal 7 and lots of web components. In the show notes, I'll list a whole bunch of links for the videos that they've been producing. They've been very prolific with the stuff that they've been sharing and showing. And these days, there have been a lot of excitement, a lot of talk around headless Drupal. A lot of focus on that happens on the other side of this equation that I'm interested in. A lot of the work to make back-end systems that expose their data through web services so that you can build any kind of front end on top of that. But it seems to be going on with the idea of separating these two efforts, the front end and the back end, to being very specific disciplines. There are two main distributions that are available for you to use today. One is called Contenta. You could find that on Drupal.org, and then another one is called Reservoir, which you could also find on Drupal.org. And it's good to see that there's a lot of effort being poured into both of those. And lastly, while we're working on these things within our system, the community of people who are making web components is just starting to ramp up. There's a website called webcomponents.org where you can find web components and web component libraries that a lot of people have made. The folks that are Drupal developers working at Penn State, they've got their own set of libraries out there. Just look for the LRN the learn components. And there's a lot of fun things out there. Go search for Emoji Rain sometime. That one's a great one. There used to be the birthday cake component where it would a cake would fall into your screen and say happy birthday. It was so beautiful. There's some fun things in there, and there's some very practical foundational things as well. You could, just like, I don't know about you, but one of the things that I used to do a lot was I would click on the modules page on Drupal.org and look through all the different modules that were available to use. I feel that same thing now by looking at all the components that are available on webcomponents.org. So the thing that has me most excited about web components is that, from my own personal experience working at places where there's lots of different kinds of developers working on lots of different technologies, it can be a very siloed experience. The fact that I'm working on this and you're working on that means that we don't have things to talk about because we're probably never going to be on a project together. Because if I create this fancy thing over here, there's not a good chance that you're ever going to be using it over there. And then what makes me excited about web components is that finally isn't true. That you can make a fancy web component and it could be used over multiple platforms. It makes sense that we could reuse ideas and code across projects so that we don't have to resolve problems. And while we are a ways to getting there today, where that is like the literal truth for every bit of development, web components does seem to be a complete solution for that. Instead of having to adapt all of the code of a component, you just reuse a tag. And then reuse it everywhere, on all these platforms. And lastly, we can start today. When you're building a paragraph, go ahead, go through the process, build your structure, build your fields, write your template. But while you're writing your template, consider having all the data that you have been authoring in the structure of your component just be attributes of a web component. And then reuse that web component over other projects. I think that's what this slide was supposed to say. The workflow that you can adopt today in order to adopt web components. Yep, and then deploy it to a new site. Okay. So the future is one where I see we can build these components using a web standard that every web-targeted platform can benefit from, where the promise of building once and use everywhere finally comes true for the web without vendor lock-in. And based on the programming languages that every novice web developer can quickly learn from and adopt. A future where our development practices become more like engineering. Build specific components that have their own validation and tests to prove that they're going to do everything they claim to do. And where you can reuse those components with confidence. A future where we can continue to pursue our expertise in our different platforms and systems, but we can come together building discrete components that can be reused everywhere. We all will benefit from this explosion of creativity and can build off of the ideas of others. Here are a couple of extra links that I've been gathering. Most notable, there is you guys.
Just stories, Chris.
You guys.
That's right by your demo.
We've been enjoying listening to you.
Yes.
Where did they go?
Lost.
You guys. I don't even know where they are. They're gone.
There it goes.
You saw it for a second?
Yeah, we went through it.
Solved.
Start over.
Oh, some pretty good graphics too. Okay. A couple of links I've gathered. Most notable is the Polymer Slack. You can tune into the actual developers who are working on the Polymer library that helps make web components. That link will generate an invite for you, and you can get in, ask the community of developers questions, and that's how I've learned everything I know about web components. Last night I found this Twitch account of somebody who was making web components live. I hope that's a clean channel for folks. There's a link for the latest Polymer Summit where they were talking about how the development life will be with Polymer 3. And thank you. So I'll put these slides online, and we'll see if you can fill in the gaps of what I was saying with comparing that to a specific slide. Is there any questions? Any crazy code you want me to do?
How soon is it going to be ready?
Now.
It's
Now.
8.
Like a year ago. It was ready a year ago. But it's really ready now. Any suggestions on how to make this talk better other than showing the slides while I'm talking?
You pointed us to lots of resources, Chris, but if I wanted to go home and use this knowledge as a project, what is the first thing I'm going to do?
First thing you're going to do is build the structures you normally build. When it comes time to theming, you would consider using a web component. And the way that you would do that is you would first make the web component in isolation to make sure that if you funnel in the right values into the right slots, that it would render the right thing. And then you would simply just add it to your Drupal project. When the element is finished, it's basically a .html file with a lot of dependencies. One of the dependencies will be the polyfill itself, web components. But the webcomponents.org and Polymer Project have great tutorials about creating your first component. I guess I could have put a link to the web labs where they actually go through the process of making a component step by step. That'd be a good one to do. But the code from a Drupal perspective is quite simple. You just modify your libraries.yaml file in order to bring in the polyfill. You would also include in there bringing in the actual definition of the tag, and then you can just use it anywhere. If you wanted to show up on a specific page, then you use your Drupal knowledge to make sure those libraries show up on a specific page. But if those dependencies are met, then you just use that tag anywhere and everywhere you want.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be around if you want more questions.